part of writing this book was imagining like what was the novel that I wish I had had as a little girl. It's kind of about her hatching this plan to prove to everybody like, hey, I can be a star and have a disability. My disability is not a big deal, but everyone else seems to make it a big deal. I've had people come up to me and strangers be like, "Can I pray for you?" And it usually comes from a good place, but I think that like it's still based on assumptions of thinking that, oh, my life isn't fulfilling or that I need to be saved because of my disability.
Welcome to the Global Disability News Network podcast, powered by GADIM, the Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment. We are a disabled-led, accessible, multimedia platform where disability isn't a side note, it's the lens. We share stories that center the diverse perspectives of people with disabilities and report on how decisions, systems, and events in everyday life impact the disability community worldwide. I'm Karina Sturm, News Director of the Global Disability News Network, and your co-host. With me is co-host and fellow journalist Amy Zayed.
Hello, lovely to meet you. Not you, obviously, everyone else.
For this episode, we are very, very happy to be joined by Wendy Lu. Wendy is a journalist and the editor at the New York Times and the author of the new young adult novel Casting April. Her work speaks to questions of representation, storytelling, and what it means to shape disability narratives within mainstream media. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
It's lovely to have you, Wendy. So good to finally speak to you after having heard so much and read your book. Wow.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah, Amy's already a fan, I know. She kept ranting about her book. Not ranting, rambling. Oh my God, see, my brain fog is kicking in already.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it.
No, I really am a fan. I'm going to talk to you later about it, but yes, it's one of my fave books at the moment. So no, it's actually my favorite book at the moment. So yeah.
I'm so glad. I feel like as an author, that especially like a debut author, you never really know how people will receive your book. So I'm really glad to hear that you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to talk more about it.
Now I'm going on about it all the time and saying, oh, how much I like it. Everyone else who hasn't read it, just give us an idea what it's all about.
Sure. So Casting April is a contemporary middle grade novel. It's about this really talented 12-year-old girl named April, and she is just like very passionate about all things theater and Broadway. She's an amazing actress, and she decides to audition for her school's fall play. She thinks that she's knocked it out of the park, and then she finds out that she actually didn't get it because the theater director decided like she wouldn't be good for it simply because she has a disability. So it's kind of about her hatching this plan to prove to everybody like, hey, I can be a star and have a disability. And it's also about her kind of learning how to believe in herself and not maybe focus so much on the external validation, but also it's hard because it's like she knows that she has talent, and when someone underestimates her, there's a sense of like, wait, like I know that I can do this. Watch me. So yeah, that's essentially what the book is about, and I'm excited for readers to discover it.
So what kind of conversation of like disability representations could that book bring up? I mean, especially for young adults or young children. I said, when I read the book, I said to Karina, oh my God, I wish someone had given me that book when I was 12, because obviously I'm yeah, I'm quite old. Well, back in the 80s and 90s, no way you'd have that book.
Mm, yeah, I feel like I definitely part of writing this book was imagining like what was the novel that I wish I had had as a little girl. And, you know, the main character, April, she has the same disability that I have. So I have a tracheostomy tube that helps me breathe. I've had it ever since I was a baby. And I'm 33 now, so more than 3 decades. It's all that I've ever known. Um, I have it because of I was born with bilateral vocal cord paralysis. So, it affects my breathing, but it doesn't affect like my voice. I can speak, and you know, when I was younger, I used to love to do theater as well. So, you know, April and I share this disability, and also this I I you know enjoyment of theater. I don't do theater anymore, but I used to like it back in school. So I brought in a lot of those experiences into this book. Um, and yeah, just I in terms of like different themes of the book, um, it's a lot of it is about what it's like moving through a world where you have a physical, visible disability that is apparent, when you first meet me or April. Um, Maybe you can hear, in my voice or the way that I breathe. Um, and yeah, what it's like to move through a world where people kind of judge you immediately based on upon meeting you. Um, and then, you know, I kind of underestimate you based on your disability, and kind of having to always like prove yourself or think about like, why am I not good enough? When in reality, it's not us, it's the way that other people perceive us, and non-disabled people kind of making assumptions based on what they don't know. So that's maybe like one of the broader themes, but there are a bunch more as well. I'm happy to talk about too, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry, Karina, you wanted to say
Oh
something?
no, it's all good. Keep going because
No,
you
no.
actually, I think you read the book in like one day. It took me
Yes.
much longer.
No, honestly, because no, I was the only because there was it hit me on so many levels, Wendy. I mean, I was the only brown girl in my grade when
Mm,
I was at school for a long time until I think when I was almost the end of high school. I think the last 2 years of high school, we got two more brown girls. Um, and all my school life, I was always the alien, like the brown North African kid that has a visible disability, like
mm,
the blind brown girl. And it always alienates you, and you always have to prove yourself. And I could relate to April. I could relate to Zahra so much. And I was like, God,
mm.
I've heard this all before. This is me in a nutshell. Thank you so much. And it just it's on so many levels. I mean, looking at the time we're in, even more than ever, like with politically and socially, I think these topics are so important.
Yeah.
Was that something that you, or did anyone like talk to you about? Did you ever talk to it about anyone? Like, was this something you wanted people to kind of talk about in class or in the playground, wherever?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because when I think back on when I was younger, um, you know, I mean, even now I get questions all the time on the street, in the subway, people asking like, what's that around your neck? Um, sometimes it's more polite questions, other times maybe not so much. I've had people come up to me and strangers be like, "Can I pray for you?" And I it usually comes from a good place, but I think that like it's still based on assumptions of thinking that, oh, my life isn't fulfilling or that I need to be saved because of my disability. And so I think when I was younger, actually, I remember in sixth grade, it was like the first day of middle school, and the teacher asked me to stand up in front of the whole class and to basically talk about my disability. And I feel like I feel very mixed about it because on one hand, I think it is good and helpful to kind of share with other young people and adults, you know, like who maybe don't know about my trach tube, what it is, show that like I'm, I'm up here. I have a disability and I have all these interests, and you know, I'm a multifaceted person. Um, at the same time, I feel weird about it because there is something kind of I don't know if objectifying is the right word, but like something about like the disability gaze where, I stood up in front of the class so that all my peers could look at me and kind of the disability sort of on display. And, I think I could have said no. It's not like they made me go up. They like asked, if I would be willing to do that. And I did. Um, and it's kind of a strange thing to like also have a young girl do that. But it's like, would I have wanted an adult to speak for me? I don't think so either. So, you know, that's like a very strong memory in my mind. But I had kids growing up all the time who would ask about my disability. And I think nowadays, because I'm an adult now and I've had 30 years to practice this, that I'm very open to questions and like people who do want to know more and they're respectful about it. But I know not all disabled people feel that way. Like nobody's entitled to your personal information.
Hmm.
And so it really is like a case by case basis.
I
How
also
did
think,
you...
sorry, you can go on. Go on, Karina.
How did you manage this kind of balance of, trying to bring in your own experience, trying to bring in like a disability lens, but also not like focusing too much on the disability?
Yeah, so I think there's one line in that April says kind of like in the last two-thirds of the book where she says like, you know, I feel like my disability is not a big deal, but everyone else seems to make it a big deal. And I feel like that is so true, at least oftentimes for me, where people have all these questions and they're really worried about like X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, I really just want to try to live my life like everybody else. And it's not something that like, I mean, I live with it every day, but I'm not constantly like, you know, I tired. Oh, excuse me, talking about it or like I'm just living my life. And so I think when I was writing this book, it really is about how like this is who April is. She's always had a trach tube like me. She loves theater and acting. This is what she wants to do. It brings her joy. But then because of other people's assumptions, she's not able to like show what she can do simply because of their like assumptions and kind of ableism. And so it's like even it is about disability, like that's such a big theme. But even more so, I think it's about kind of maybe breaking down misconceptions of what people think about your disability and kind of showing that like we are also, yes, we're disabled and we're so much more. Um, and so, yeah, I feel like it is about disability and also, yeah, showing that like, yeah, there's so much more as well.
I'm curious, like usually when one tries to pitch a disability related story, it doesn't matter if it's like fiction or non-fiction, it's usually kind of a hard sell. And now you're with like a huge publishing house. Like how hard was it to like sell that story?
Yeah, so I just to give a little bit of like background, I started writing this book at the end of 2019. So very much it was like the thing that like helped me survive the pandemic from like a mental health perspective. And I I spent like basically 2, 3 years writing this book. And I
Wow.
think it was in 2023 when I signed with my agent. And I'm happy to like talk more about that process, but I signed with my agent in 2023, and then we went out on submission in 2024, I believe. And then a few months went by, and then we sold to Penguin Random House. Um, but I think there's so much in the submission process that is very elusive, especially to authors maybe who haven't gone through it before. And it really is like a roller coaster where, you work with your agent to decide which imprints are we going to pitch this book to and why, who are the editors who maybe really um, champion inclusive storytelling, or maybe who might be interested in have been interested in similar books. And so we did get lots of rejections as well. I think a big factor of it is actually related to the middle grade market. Middle grade covers children ages 8 to 12. And for the last several years, basically, middle grade hasn't been doing so great. So it's been really hard to break into the industry just in general. And so that was like a really big factor, I think, in some of the rejections where it was like, I love this, but I think like I'm not sure how to sell it in this market, given that middle grade is so tough right now. From the feedback that we got, a lot of editors did really appreciate the storyline of disability. It was just, yeah, the factor of middle grade that was challenging. But I know that like I think historically disability has been something that can be challenging, just kind of pitch and show, hey, this is something that really matters, and there are readers out there who are craving this kind of story. Something that I have had like some, that I've wondered about, and I'm still kind of worried about sometimes, to be totally candid, is like, not a lot of people have heard of tracheostomy tubes. And like when you say bilateral vocal cord paralysis, it's a very like technical medical term. And so, I think there are a lot of other types of disabilities that maybe people have heard of or encounter a lot more. And so I do have this like maybe internalized ableism fear of like, oh no, what if the fact that like trach tube is so unfamiliar, will that be a factor in whether or not people are interested in this book? So there is that thought as well, for sure. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
You did.
Okay. Okay, good.
Can I add something that I'd just like to go a bit, just one last question for me at least about the actual characters, because what I liked about it, I mean, you covered everything from ableism, visible disabilities, invisible disabilities. You covered even the fact that you need visibility from someone like Nancy, who's the journalist. But there's one thing that I felt was missing, and I was wondering whether you did that on purpose, or whether you just felt it wasn't the right thing in the right time for this book. What was missing was, okay, everyone who had been either a bully or was ableist had a reason. Like, Miss Rooney had a reason because she had an invisible disability. We had Graham, who, yeah, even it was in his upbringing. But sometimes we face and we both know, I mean, we all three of us know, I mean, we face ableism just because of ableism, because some people are just, I'm sorry to say, but some people are assholes out there. You can edit this out if you like. But some people are just not nice. They're just the way they are. And you didn't feature these kind of people. So the kind of, okay, sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, because in many ways, sometimes I was thinking, if I had been in April's position, I don't know how she kept silent for so long. Was there a reason for not doing that? For not featuring these people,
Yeah, it's funny. I actually had another character in the book earlier on who kind of fit this description of like someone who's just a straight up not good person, bad person who just is not just ableist, but like is like a horrible character. And it was another teacher who I basically like had history with Miss Rooney, like they knew each other back in the day, and was just always really horrible. And I ended up taking him out. It's something that my editor and I kind of talked about, and it was kind of like he felt a little one-dimensional, and he also felt a little bit too convenient to like be in certain scenes. It's like, you know, um, he also like was just a really horrible person, and there was just something about not feeling like maybe some of the things he said were necessarily realistic, I guess. Not that like obviously there are unfortunately horrible teachers out there, but just like certain things that he would say and do didn't seem to fit the rest of the book.
Mm.
And we also had to bring down the word count just a little bit. So we ended up taking him out. And it is something that I thought about. I do like to write very complex characters. Even with Miss Rooney, there was a point where I felt like I was facing a road with two forks, where I was like, I can either make Miss Rooney a really like straightforward character where she is just ableist, doesn't understand disability at all, and is you know, straight up like just a villain. But I decided to give her a little bit more of a backstory and some more complexity, not because I think that ever excuses anything, and not to give too much away, but you know, by the end, we kind of have a little bit of a sense of like, okay, she recognizes that what she did wasn't right, and that there are some consequences. So I wanted her to be a kind of a multifaceted, complex person who, disabled people and teachers, adults can make mistakes, and they're, you know, they're not without flaws as well. And sometimes that is also part of reality. And that like it doesn't mean that they're straight up just bad people, but they do have some learning and unlearning to do. And I wanted to kind of depict that basically. Yeah.
Now, you said you started writing this during the pandemic, and it kind of helped you to cope with, mental health and whatever. How much was writing, like in your childhood, was this always kind of like a coping mechanism or a way to express yourself?
Yeah, so I have always loved writing ever since I was little. I can't actually remember a time when I wasn't writing. Um, it definitely is and always has been like a coping mechanism, a way for me to sort of absorb and understand myself and the people around me, the world around me. And so it's just something that brings me immense joy and happiness. And even when I was writing this book, if you ask any writer, they'll tell you like, oh, yeah, you think that writing is supposed to be fun, but many times it's actually really grueling. And it is true. Like so many times I would struggle with many scenes where I'm like, does this make sense? Like, are these character motivations realistic? Like, oh no, the logistics, they were on this side of the hallway, but now they're over there. Like, there's so many little things in writing that you have to think through and how's this story going to resolve? But I really enjoy that element of trying to figure out untangle these threads of a story and make them make sense, make them say something that helps other people feel less alone or feel like they're not the only people going through something. And I know like authors, educators like to say that books for kids are mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. And I really love that analogy because it is like, you get to see characters who remind you of yourself and you feel seen and you feel not alone. And other children who haven't been through experiences in a book get to understand like what they get to build empathy for people. And so I think that's also what books have always been for me as well, even now. So yeah.
Amy, for you, how did you get into writing? Or
Well,
radio?
it was one
Journalism.
it actually, I mean, it started. I remember back when I was like 11 or 12. I used to carry. There used to be these old cassette recorders with integrated microphones, really small ones, and you could put your headphones in and activate the integrated microphone. I would run around and record simply everything. Like I still have these sound diaries where I'd go, I don't know, 15th of July, 1987. And I would like kind of tell, what's happening around me and what I did and who I had an argument with and which teacher was really nice and which wasn't and who was good. And when I was 14, I basically stumbled into it because my mum was so obsessed with culture. And she obviously dragged me in each and every film and ballet and discotheque since when I was 3. Then I met a program director of British Forces Broadcasting Service who saw something in me that I didn't see when I was 14, and he trained me, and that's it. That's me done. I never left journalism ever since. I started when I was 14 and never looked back really.
I love that. I love that so much. I'm curious, what about you, Karina? How did you get into journalism and your work now?
Oh God, that was a very long, complicated route. Actually, like I remember my first German teacher at school was like, the only thing you should never be doing or considering is anything with writing that language. It was like very discouraging.
Wow.
Doesn't sound like Karina at all, to be honest.
It is so funny because, back then we would only write boring stuff, like things that I was really not interested in. Like you would write how you decorate a table, for instance. And I'm like, well, can we write something fun, like something where I can have an argument or a discussion about a topic or whatever. So like language was really neat, and it was not a thing for me. It was like, I don't know, it was just no fun. And then I went a completely different route and actually became a doctor's assistant first. And then I studied laboratory technician or technology or whatever the English word for it is. So basically I was a lab tech. And then I became chronically ill, and then everything just kind of fell apart. And that was like 10 years ago. No, oh my God, longer, 15 years ago. And from that moment on, I started a blog documenting my whole journey to finding a diagnosis, which I've always written diaries since I've been, I think, 6 years old or so, since I could write. I would write a diary. And so the blog became basically my diary about how I found my diagnosis 4 years later after becoming sick. Yeah, and then it just kind of evolved into more writing. And then I was very lucky meeting the right people at the right time and kind of stumbled into a master's degree in journalism. And yeah, that's how I ended up in journalism, really by accident.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like a lot of people that I know didn't have, linear paths to
Mm.
journalism, and a lot of people just kind of somehow fell into it or fell in love with it unexpectedly. And so yeah, I really love that. Thank you both for doing like I'm so glad we're all doing this work. I feel like it's really important.
And you know what? I could so relate to April's parents because I had the same kind of dad. My mum was really, very kind of daring. And my dad was, oh no, what if? And if you become a journalist, oh my God, something could happen if you're out there doing this and doing that. And I'm really, he was really overprotective. I mean, I had
Mm,
Egyptian parents, what do you expect? So it was like I could so relate to that, like kind of like that it even went as far as my dad because I
mm,
would go to my the program director who trained me. He would say, okay, you'd come to the station whenever you've got school holidays, and I'll train you with our trainee. And that meant like interview training, technical training, even legal media law, and I would my dad gave me he gave me house arrest. He stopped my pocket money so that I couldn't go there because the train ticket cost quite a bit because the station was about 1.5 hours away from where I was.
mm.
um, and I just didn't let anything stop me. And I remember writing a typewritten message when I got home from school with the number of the station saying, you know where I am, I don't care about your house arrest. And I just left. So yeah, I could relate to that as well. So
Yeah, I feel like, with April's parents, a lot of it is kind of inspired by my own family, my parents, because my parents are extremely loving. All they want is for me to be safe and healthy for my whole life. And I think a lot of parents feel that same way. And so I think especially when when I was a baby, and even like, for the first 10 years of my life, I think it was such a precarious situation that, parents experience a certain level of trauma. And then like when I grew up, there is kind of always this sense of fear of like any type of risk that I ever take, is it worth it? Does the reward exceed any kind of potential downsides? And with April, she does like feel this sense of like, I'm going to show everybody that I can do this, including her parents, where her mom is, she's like, one, the outside world, the real world is not so kind to people who are different. And she's like, I just don't want you to see, you get hurt, things like that. And it's all very understandable. But I think sometimes, um, she doesn't realize that doing that so much can just also hold April back from what she loves as well. So, yeah, it's definitely like we see that unfold in the book. And I feel like maybe a lot of disabled kids and like also disabled adults maybe have had similar experiences with their parents, like being very, very protective, almost to a fault, basically. And yeah, it's complicated. Yeah.
Funnily, I wasn't born disabled, right? So I developed this when I was already an adult, which is, I think, a huge privilege in itself because I had a fairly regular childhood. But also at the same time, like my parents were never confronted with disability or chronic illness, right? So it was like really, I was already an adult. I was like very independent. And then I moved back home, and all of a sudden, I was none of these things for a quite a long time. And I remember when I was 30 years old. I mean, like really a grown up, right? And this was after I already had my diagnosis. I was in a state of like accepting my disability. I was like very much okay with everything. And I went to see my best friend, and we were just like hanging out at her house, like not even at a bar, just at home. And I wouldn't text my mom for like an hour. And next thing that happens, it's not even midnight. My mom is standing in my friend's house shouting at me that I did not answer her texts. And I was like, it's not midnight. I'm 30 years old and I'm at my friend's house. It's like,
Ah.
what do you think happened?
Oh my gosh, I relate to that so much. I've had many instances, even though yeah, I'm also in my 30s. And sometimes like, if I'm in the shower and I don't pick up my phone, my parents will immediately like call my husband and be like, where's Wendy? Is she okay? And
Oh.
there's like this heart pounding, like if I don't respond immediately, there must be disaster somewhere. So yeah, I relate to that very much.
Well, did something ever happen to the both of you? Because, you know, if your parents are so worried, were there actually bad experiences?
Yeah. Or Amy, did you want to say something?
I know, you start. You start. You start.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because it's like, so with my trach tube, I have had medical emergencies happen in my life that were very sudden, very scary, life-threatening. In fifth grade, my trach tube got blocked, and because that's how I breathe, that was like I had to go. An ambulance arrived. It was my home care nurse saved my life, so that was very scary and traumatic for like my whole family. And then a few years later, I was playing baseball with like a neighbor of mine, and we had played, for years before then, and I was standing too close to the baseball bat, like he was holding the baseball bat, and I was standing too close. And basically, well, yeah, you can edit it out if it's too rough, but yeah, the my trach tube came flying off because
Ah.
the baseball bat hit it. And so I think because of these experiences that are again totally unexpected, dangerous, I think my family just developed this heightened sense of anxiety that anything bad could happen at any moment. And so it's like yeah, like I, your body goes into overdrive trying to see like figure out what's if something bad is happening. So it's hard because I completely understand why my parents can be so anxious. I think there's definitely like, yeah, past experience. And also, you know, 90% of the time when things are okay, that kind of protectiveness can feel a little stifling and can feel like, oh, like, you know, I can you believe in me sometimes? Can you believe that I am capable of doing XYZ things just like anybody else? And not everything is disaster all the time. So I think it's a really complex thing that is like parenting and trauma and all of these things that I think are pretty um uh relatable too with for a lot of disabled people. So
In terms of like your careers, I mean, you both have like completely different journeys and path in journalism. Like, but what was maybe one of the most memorable moments and experiences, good or bad?
in journalism,
Yeah, or in your career in general.
yeah, I can share briefly, I was applying for so many jobs. I finally landed one at HuffPost as uh, an editor, video producer, and eventually I also did a lot of reporting there. I think most of my disability reporting I've done at HuffPost. And then I was at Outpost for 3.5 years, I think. And then I in I think 2022, I joined the New York Times as a senior staff editor. I'm a deputy now, and that's sort of been my trajectory. But in some ways, it hasn't been linear because I was like in healthcare and recruiting, and um, it has felt like a long road. Um, and to answer your actual question about like a memorable moment, I think one of my favorite stories that I've written has been one I think it was about disabled doctors during the pandemic, and sort of how uh, doctors with disabilities experience a lot of ableism in the medical field. Medical students also as well kind of experience discrimination in medical school, and it's sort of yeah, makes it almost impossible for disabled people to be in medicine. And there's a kind of irony to that, the fact that like, you know, doctors aren't supposed to help people manage their health conditions and understand this very intimately. And yet there's like rampant ableism in the field itself. And I really wanted to explore that irony and the tension there. And it was also during a time in the pandemic where hospitals were short-staffed. There's this idea that like doctors were heroes, they couldn't go to the restroom, they couldn't have time to eat lunch. And that was sort of seen as like inspirational, which I feel like for disabled people, there are things that we can't afford to do, like not go to the restroom, which continues to fuel this ableism in the field and this tendency to like, not kind of see disabled people as less than. So I think that's my favorite story that I've written.
So since we're already pretty much at the end of this podcast, I think my last question for the both of you is like, what do you wish your future looks like? Like what's next and what's the best case scenario, like the outcome? Wendy.
Yeah. I think, part of my job at the New York Times now is to help train other editors on how to edit, the craft of editing. And I also, I'm on the board for the National Center on Disability in Journalism, which is at Arizona State University. And I give a lot of trainings on reporting on disability with accuracy, respect, care, and I definitely want to keep doing that. I feel like that gives me a sense of purpose, and it makes me feel like I'm helping to improve coverage and helping other journalists understand like how to cover disability, supporting disabled journalists as well, especially younger disabled journalists or journalists who have entered the field. Maybe it's their second career, want to help continue to support them and mentor them. And then also on the book side, I absolutely want to keep writing books. I have multiple disabilities, so that's something that definitely is weaved into my creative work all the time as well. And I want to keep doing that. And I'm excited for the future. It's always very busy, but I feel really fortunate and privileged to be able to do this work. And I feel like it's a responsibility of mine to continue to tell stories and help other people, give them a platform to tell their stories. And yeah, I'm really excited for the future.
Well, I think for me, there are two things. One thing is, I mean, when I started talking about experiences, when I started journalism, I thought very much, I don't want to do much disability stuff. And I think since COVID and since I've got this autoimmune disease that I was talking about, and since it got diagnosed, I realized that actually I need to give back to the community because I'm fairly privileged to do what I'm doing. So that's when I started putting my focus a bit more on that. So I want to kind of explore that a bit more. But on the other hand, I want to also do more in my culture sector and maybe do more be more out there and make more people see that it's possible and that it's doable. And and if whatever, from hosting events to hosting radio shows to reporting on whatever, I just enjoy doing what I do. I like reporting, I like telling stories, and the more the merrier. I think there's so much to explore, and I wouldn't be able to tell you what my favorite thing is that I would like to explore. I just think like the more interesting and the more curiosity it sparks, the quicker you've got me in it. So yeah.
I think I find it always funny when you say, Amy, that you don't really want to like write too much about disability because you literally are, at least for the Global Disability News Network.
No,
But
I think you. What I mean is, I don't want to be primarily doing it.
I know.
That's what I mean. It's like I liked it, and I think that's what I think is probably the unique thing about what I do is that I like to be in both worlds. I'd like to be writing about disability and talking about it because I can empower other disabled people, and at the same time, I can look back and do whatever, interview James Blake or the Gorillas, and then get back to doing, Global Disability Network. You know what I mean?
You can have best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is kind of the end of this podcast. We have not spoken about anything that we planned, but that was okay because it was even better.
Yeah, it was
If
great.
if you want to learn more about Wendy's work or the book, we are putting that in the show notes, of course. And Amy's also going to write a review about the book, which I feel like everybody
wait.
already knows the outcome of that. We'll also put the link in the show notes for this. And just in case, I feel like nobody knows that, but Wendy is a part of our upcoming film Props No More as well. So there's going to be a lot of Wendy on our channel in the future.
Audiences might get a little tired of me.
Well, thanks so much for being here and for sharing all of this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was a really great conversation. And I
Thank
also
you so
love
much.
learning more about your journeys as well.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And if you'd like, you can tune in the next time. Hopefully, this was only one of many, many episodes to come. So please follow our podcast, send us ideas, or even contact us. We'd love to hear all of your perspectives.